Welcome back. In the last session, we used the filter transformation to filter only data related to Europe. So that means the continent is no longer relevant, so we can drop it. And also, when we discussed the requirements, we talked about dropping the rate 14-day column. And also renaming the date reported date. To make these changes, Dataflow gives you a transformation called Select Transformation. So you can find that under Schema Modifier section and click Select. And that's a Select Transformation. So I'm going to call this one a Select Only Required Fields. Okay. And our incoming stream is the filter. And before we talk about the options here, let's have a look at the mappings. So by default, Dataflow maps every input to an output. So everything coming in is going out. So we're not doing anything more. In order to implement the changes we need to implement, we just need to delete the continent here. Rate 14-day field here. And then change the date to reported date in the name as field. So those are the changes we need to make. But before we do them, let's try and understand these options and learn a bit more about the Select Transformation. So the auto mapping here, if you enable that one, what that does is, actually, if we had any drifted columns, it'll also flow them through. So it's quite useful if we think our schema is going to change often, and we want all of that data to flow through to the sink. If we didn't have the auto mapping, what we'll go through is only the fields listed here, but if you wanted everything to flow through, then you would enable the auto mapping here. Let's disable that one. And once you made any changes, so for example, if I delete the continent and then if I wanted that back, actually, I can just do a reset, it'll just populate everything back. Add mapping lets you create new mapping similar to what we're seeing here. So there are two types of mapping. So one's a fixed mapping, another one is a rule-based mapping. So whatever you're seeing here are all fixed mappings. The rule-based mapping is where you can specify an expression and then you can evaluate that to true or false and have separate fields based on that. So let's do a fixed mapping. So the default, it started a new one, the default normally is the top column. So if you want to have an indicator column come through again as another name. So that is the cases indicator. And now your mapping would have, your inputs are 9 columns, but you've got 10 output columns. But if you look and inspect, you would normally find them, but in this case, you're not going to. That's because we got the skip duplicate input column. So in this case, actually, the indicator itself is a duplicate input. What it does is as soon as it sees the first one, it's going to ignore the second one. So let's take that one out and then have a look at it. And you've got the new column here, cases indicator. So it's going to come through twice. One under the indicator column and the other one under the cases indicator column. Let's talk about the options while we are here. The skip duplicate input columns and the skip duplicate output columns are ticked by default. What that means is, if you have a duplicate input column, it'll only take the first one, and then it'll ignore the next ones. The scenario when this could happen is you had a join transformation or a lookup transformation where both of your sources had the same column. So in our case, at some point, we'll be joining to a country lookup. And if you have country on both of them, this will only let you take one of them through. And if we take the output columns, then, actually, if you had 2 columns named with the same name, it'll take the top one, and it'll ignore the next one. So let's untick both of them for now, so that we can play with the data. Let's now try and create a rule-based mapping. Before we do that, let's delete all the mappings here, so it's easier to look at what's happening. So by default it puts a new one, but let's not worry about that for now. Let me click on the Add Mappings and Rule-Based Mappings, and then we can now delete the top record. So this is the rule-based mapping. You can now specify your matching condition for your input column names and the output column names. So let's say, actually, we want to prefix all our input column names with cases to represent that, actually, it's coming from our cases source. You just click on that one, it opens up the Visual Expression Builder, which we've seen in the filter transformation. And then in this case, I'm going to rename all my input columns. So I'll just specify true. So that is everything. And then I want to prefix everything with cases. So I'm going to do cases underscore and then plus we want to have this name, whatever is coming in, this here is represented by the $, so you just say $. So if your input column name was country, that would be now coming out as cases underscore country. Let's see it working in action. So in order to see which columns have now been renamed to what, you can go into Inspect, or the easiest thing to do is click on the preview here, which is the glasses. So as you can see, any column coming in with a country as the input name now will look like cases_country. And everything has been prefixed. So you can also see that in your Inspect. So every column has been updated to prefix with cases. So you can do much more than this. So for example, instead of renaming every column, I want to rename the columns which have got the data type of string with the suffix of string. I can do type == string. And now I need to do the $+. Now, I'm gonna suffix it with _string. So if I just save and finish, and you can see every column, which is a string data type, now has a _string at the end. And if you wanted to do it for the dates, you can either create another mapping, or you can even change this to have a case statement. So if the type is string, it does that. If the type is date, you do _date for that. So it is quite powerful in that way. So when you have a huge number of columns, and you want to do some kind of renaming of the columns, you can use this to do it. So now that we understand more about the select transformation, let's implement our requirement using the fixed mapping and the rule-based mapping. So let's delete what's in here. So that would be going. Let's click on the reset to get all our mappings back. So we got them back, and I'm gonna delete the continent and the rate 14 day. And let's also delete the date and implement the rule-based mapping just to be sure. We could just put reported in here, but I'm going to delete that and then add a rule-based mapping. And I'm gonna say the name == date. I'm gonna call that as reported. So now that should come out as reported date. So if I go and inspect now, I should see reported date, and we can see the data as well in the preview. Okay, so we got the country code, the continents disappeared, and we got the indicator, daily count. And also if I track that over and then we got the source, and we should have our date at the end, reported date to the end. So that is the select transformation. That's the end of this session. I'll see you in the next one.